Years ago, when I was in college, I was really interested in the idea of reading a book that played with the medium in a way that I'd never seen before. And I looked at books that might fit this criteria, and one book was recommended over and over again. That book was House of Leaves by Mark C. Danielewski. And I think it took me 3 solid attempts before I finally got hooked and finished the novel. It's dense and a little confusing and pretty experimental, but it's a great read if you stick with it. Today's video is not going to be about House of Leaves, though that video will come someday. The reason that I mention House of Leaves is because the book that I'm going to be looking at today reminded me of it in a lot of ways. It was a book that we read for the members of my book club. That book is We Used to Live Here by Marcus Kliewer. And it shares a lot of the hallmarks that House of Leaves has. There's a meta-narrative, a confusing house, and characters slipping further and further into madness. I'd just say that We Used to Live Here handles this on a smaller scale that is more easily digestible for a wider audience, and there's a good explanation for that. This book was adapted from a series that was originally posted on the r/nosleep subreddit. I've previously covered Baraska and Pen Pal, which also came from that subreddit originally. But unlike those two stories, I had actually not read the No Sleep version of this before reading the novel. I didn't even know it came from No Sleep originally. And with this channel, I kind of try to alternate between internet horror and horror literature, and this book kind of covers both bases simultaneously. So today I'm going to be going through the entire narrative of We Used to Live Here and explaining some of the more cryptic plot elements. But real quick, if you haven't subbed yet, then please do. I'm trying to reach 100,000 subs at the end of 2025. I cover horror literature and internet horror on this channel, and I release a video every couple days, and I just love to have you here in the community. But enough intro, let's get into the twisting conundrum of Marcus Kliewer's We Used to Live Here. The very first thing you'll see when opening this book is the dedication. This book is dedicated to the readers from the days of No Sleep. Like I mentioned earlier, this book was originally a series of posts on No Sleep, and unfortunately, at least for me, that's a little apparent in the overall writing of the novel. I'm not saying it's a bad book. I don't think that at all. I actually really like this book. I just think the overall writing of the story, when it's not furthering the plot, is a little less engaging than I'd personally like. But luckily, we're pretty much just talking about the plot today, and I think the plot is really interesting and does a lot of really cool and interesting things and has a ton of fun clues to piece together. After the dedication, we get an image of a bunch of different pieces of paper and notes and maps with the label Old House Map, and we also get a word written in Morse code. I will reveal the entire Morse code message at the end of the story because we get one word to the message before each chapter. Besides that message, there isn't really anything on this page that means anything to us right now, but we can look at all that later when it's relevant. Our story starts with our main character, Eve, opening her front door to a family standing on the porch during a cold Friday night. Eve has just recently moved into this new house with her long-term girlfriend, Charlie. The two of them flip houses, which means they buy old houses, fix them up, and then sell them for a profit. This particular house is located in Oregon, fairly far removed from the city. They have a few neighbors, but it's a little bit of a walk to get to their houses. There is only one road in and out of the little residential mountain they live on, which makes the house fairly secluded. I always love a story set in the Pacific Northwest. I live right on the border between Washington and Oregon, and I absolutely love it here. It's just a very naturally spooky place. But anyway, Eve opens the door and sees a family of 5. Thomas, the father, is a middle-aged man. Eve guesses that he's in his early 40s. He has broad shoulders and a square jaw. The mother is named Paige, and she's a small, blonde woman who wears a silver crucifix around her neck, and they also have 3 kids, a girl and 2 boys. Jenny, the daughter, is the smallest and youngest. The 2 teenage boys are named Newton and Kai, and Thomas tells Eve that he grew up in her house and wants to take a look around. He says that he and his family are moving to Minnesota. They parked their moving van down the road, and he wanted to show his family where he grew up one last time before they left. Eve is kind of weirded out by this request, but she has a hard time saying no. She says that her girlfriend Charlie has been encouraging her to be more direct as of late. I personally relate to this a lot. I have a hard time being direct with people in my life. I've been trying to get better at setting boundaries, but that's definitely a skill that I've had to learn over time. Eve introduces us to the concept of Mo. Mo was a childhood toy of hers. It was a small, white-furred chimp with plastic symbols, and she has never once seen another toy exactly like him. She loved Mo growing up, but lost him when she was a kid, and now she sees Mo as the personification of all of her anxieties. She has a tendency to assume the worst in stressful situations. With Charlie currently out of the house, Eve has to be the one to turn away Thomas and his family. She says that tonight's not a good night, and he seems to be taking this rather well. Thomas tells his family that it's time to go, and they turn to head back to the moving truck, but Jenny, the youngest daughter, stays behind and looks up longingly at the house. Eve sees little Jenny's interest in the house and decides to let the family look around for a minute. She thinks that she's just overreacting or overthinking the entire situation, and Thomas agrees to only stay for 15 minutes. Spoiler Spoilers, Thomas is going to stay a lot longer than 15 minutes. Full spoilers for the entire book, by the way, in case that wasn't obvious already. Very similar to My Heart is a Chainsaw, which I covered in a video a couple weeks ago, this book also has little inserts between the chapters that give us some more information on the world. The first insert is simply a property listing for the house. We learn that it is listed with the address 3709 Heritage Lane. It's 30 minutes away from the small town of Yale and an hour and 45 minutes away from the city. There's not much else to take from this insert other than the stipulation in the listing that suggests the house hasn't been inspected prior to its real estate listing. Back to the house, the family walks inside and Thomas immediately opens the door to the nearby coat closet without looking, and it seems like he is familiar with the house after all, he wasn't lying. Jenny is carrying a notebook and a pen with a flashlight on it. She seems to be the most curious of the kids, while Newton and Kai seem like your average rowdy teenagers. It's clear from the get-go that Paige is quite religious. She gets mad at Thomas for using the word bastard, which seems a little harsh. I haven't talked about it much before, but I actually don't swear at all in my daily life, really. It's just how I was raised, and if I try to swear, I sound like an edgy 10-year-old. I feel like that's a skill you have to learn when you're a middle schooler. But I don't even know if I'd consider the word bastard a swear word. Maybe that's just me though, so if YouTube demonetized this video, then we'll know for sure, I guess. Back to the story, we learn that there used to be a chandelier made of antlers in the foyer that Thomas's dad made, but it's gone now, and it was gone when Charlie and Eve moved in. We also learn that Eve and Charlie have a border collie named Shiloh that Eve found as a stray and is fiercely loyal to her, but very wary of strangers. Thomas says that he used to have a chocolate lab as a kid, and he points out a symbol carved underneath the banister railing, which is like a circle divided by a number of intersecting lines. That's just the way the book describes it. I don't think it ever shows the symbol, so that's all I've got for it. But Thomas says that his sister used to carve those symbols, that she used to hide messages everywhere, and that she had quite the imagination. The family heads upstairs, and Jenny seems to be obsessively recording every detail of the house in her little journal. They stop at a room with a stained glass window in it. The window is in the study, and it depicts an apple tree. Thomas seems confused and says that he doesn't remember that window being in the study. He thought it was in the front of the house. They leave the study, and Thomas says that there's new wallpaper that's been put up since he lived there. He says that there used to be a dumbwaiter in the halls, but that it's been covered up now. Jenny asks what a dumbwaiter is, and Thomas says that it's like a tiny elevator, and Eve says they used to call them dumbwaiters because they're like silent waiters. They're dumb. Kai asks if that means that they're stupid, but Eve clarifies that dumb used to mean mute or unable to speak. Jenny thanks her for the clarification, but mistakenly calls her Emma. Thomas corrects Jenny quickly, and then the family moves with him to a room at the end of the hall. He grows quiet and looks in the room with reverence, and he says that it was his sister Allison's room. Eve can sense that there's some history there that she doesn't want to insert herself into, so she excuses herself down to the main floor and lets the family wander around. She goes downstairs to the living room and starts to pull some nails out of the wall that were put there to hang something, presumably. Shiloh starts to growl at the door in the basement. We learn that Eve is scared of basements in general. She's only gone down into this one for a second to look at the rooms, but didn't stay down there. It just gave her a creepy feeling. She starts to grow worried about Shiloh's fixation on the basement door before seeing an ant climbing the door frame, and she figures that's what Shiloh must have been fixated on. The family comes downstairs, and Jenny asks to see the basement. Eve says that there are dangerous tools down there, kind of as an excuse to not let them explore it. Jenny says that she'll be careful and that she brought her pen flashlight to see in the dark. She's very, very eager to get down there. Thomas says that Eve said no and that they have to leave now. Kai and Newton start fighting, so Thomas breaks them up, and Eve sees a light outside the house. It almost looks like a porch light, but there aren't any neighbors in that direction. As Thomas gathers his family to leave, he notices that Jenny is missing. He and Eve rush upstairs to see that the wallpaper where the dumbwaiter is has been torn open. The dumbwaiter is gone, meaning that Jenny must have made her way to the basement after all. The next insert is a listing for a free chocolate lab up for adoption. The family is giving him away along with all of the stuff due to an incident with their son. This seems to be Thomas's childhood pet. Back in the house, Thomas tells Eve that Jenny will sometimes play these impromptu games of hide and seek, and that he and Eve should go look for her. Eve suggests that they all go up in a group to make it easier, but Thomas says that the more dramatic the response, the less likely Jenny is to give up the game, so they head into the basement. They split up, and Eve finds a room in the basement with an old wardrobe that's been painted sky blue. The lights don't work in the basement, so they have flashlights on them. Eve thinks that this would be the perfect spot to hide, and she approaches the wardrobe and sees a pair of blinking eyes looking out at her. She opens the wardrobe and it's completely empty. She notices a painting in the wardrobe facing away with a silver frame, which kind of explains the glint of the eyes, but she's not sure why she would have seen them blinking. She also notices a trail of ants in the basement. She forgets about them momentarily, and she takes a look at the painting in the wardrobe. It's a chocolate lab staring into the dark woods with a red gas lantern on the ground next to him, and Eve notes that it looks somewhat foreboding. She walks back into the dark hallway to find Thomas standing completely stiff with his hands clenched and his flashlight pointed directly to the ground, like sitting there, standing completely stiff like a statue almost. She calls out to him and he doesn't respond, and she calls out a few more times while approaching him, and he finally snaps around and seems confused because he didn't hear her call him. He says that he's scared of basements, and Eve says that she is too, and Thomas says that he's found Jenny. She's in a small nook that an adult would have to crawl through. It's almost like it's in between the insulation, but it is like a part of the house that seems to have been built out in a sense. He says that he and his sister used to hide in there, and that it's like a little room no bigger than a walk-in closet, and he suggests that they just wait for her to come out on her own. Earlier, he had told Eve to grab Jenny if he saw her, so she's a little confused as to why he's changed his tune. It just kind of seems like he doesn't want Eve to enter the little nook. He does the classic knock, this one, and waits for Jenny's response. She gives the 2 final knocks, and Thomas looks relieved. He says that they should just wait for her upstairs and that she'll come up eventually. The next insert is an advertisement for a local metal band in Yale that will be playing at the pub. The band is called Ring of Eyes, which doesn't mean anything to us quite yet, but will later. Back in the house, Charlie comes in through the front door. It's snowing at this point, and she says that the roads are getting worse, and she's slightly confused at the presence of the Foust family. I should say that Thomas's family's last name is Foust, which is sure to set off some alarm bells in you literature nerds. Charlie asks the family if it's their moving truck that's down the road, and they say it is. This makes Eve feel a little bit better since she had never verified the existence of the truck before. Eve is expecting Charlie to kick the family out of the house since she's usually the more direct of the two, but she offers to cook the family some dinner while they wait for Jenny. This catches Eve off guard, and she talks to Charlie about this in private. She doesn't mention Thomas's strange episode that he had in the basement, though. She just thinks that she's on edge because Charlie came back much later than Eve thought she would. It's been a very strange night for everyone so far. Eve, Charlie, and the Foust sit down for dinner, and Eve notices a small circular tattoo on Paige's neck that has been laser removed. She says she got it before she met Thomas. Charlie shows off her inverted triangle tattoo on her finger, and Paige seems bothered by this. She's very religious and seems to be wary of Eve and Charlie's relationship in general. Thomas asks if they can say a prayer before dinner, and Eve thinks about a recurring nightmare she has where she gets to the gates of heaven, but there is no one with the name Eve Palmer on the list, and she is rejected. They start eating, and Charlie gets a notification for a winter storm warning that suggests tire chains for anyone traveling. She says that they have chains in the attic. Paige starts to interrogate Eve and Charlie about their life choices, and just as things are about to get confrontational, a dusty Jenny appears and apologizes for hiding from them. She says that she's lost her pen, and Eve says that she can look for it and mail it to her. Thomas says that won't be necessary, and the family gathers their things to leave. Thomas begins to ask Eve if she's ever seen anything, but then he cuts himself off. Charlie gets a notification that the only bridge down the mountain is closed due to severe weather conditions. It looks like the Foust family won't be leaving quite so soon. The next insert is just a bit from the Wikipedia page on laser tattoo removal. There's not much to learn from it. Back in the house, Charlie and Eve let the Foust sleep upstairs, and Eve tells her about the strange day she's had and Thomas's weird, freezing thing he did in the basement. Charlie shows her a locket that she bought herself. There's a blurry picture of Eve on the inside, and she jokes that it's the only known photo of Eve Palmer. They hear Shiloh growling and see that the front door is open. They look outside to see Thomas hunched over in the yard with his hands over his mouth and tears running down his cheeks. They approach him and he seems to snap out of this trance. He sounds scared and says that he's sorry and that he didn't mean to, and he asks where he is and how he got there and where Allison is. Charlie tells Thomas that he's been sleepwalking and takes him back into the house. Eve stays behind and looks at the dark woods around the house, and she feels like she's being watched. The next insert is a description of sleepwalking, night terrors, and sleep paralysis. These inserts that aren't related to the story mostly exist for the Morse code word at the end of them. Back in the house, Thomas is getting warmed up by the fire, and Eve asks him what he was referring to earlier when he started to ask if she's ever seen anything. He starts by saying that the episode that he just had was a fit of sleepwalking, and that he used to do it all the time, and his parents made him believe it was the work of the devil. Then he asks Eve if she's noticed anything strange around the house. She says she hasn't, but Thomas almost looks a little disappointed at this. He says that when he was little, his sister started to claim that she was finding things she had never seen in the house before, despite the fact that they had always been there. She would walk into rooms and claim that she had never seen them before or that they were in a different spot than they used to be, and her parents just told her to pray this feeling away. It escalated to the point that Allison was convinced that the people in her life had been replaced by strangers, and she carved the strange circular symbol around the house to help her remember. Thomas almost feels guilty for what happened to her and was hoping that by coming back to the house, he might be able to understand what she was going through just a little bit better. He excuses himself for the night and Eve notices that he has tiny little scars on his face. They almost look like tiny burn scars, like he was almost like splashed with hot oil. Charlie and Eve go to bed and reflect on how strange his family is, and Eve drifts off to sleep. The next chapter is super short. There are a couple of these in the book that seem to either be Eve's dreams or the viewpoint of another character, and since they're short, I'll read them fully. You have to hide. She scrambles through the dark, pushing through branches, weaving around trees. Behind her, voices call out, shouting, searching. They speak words she recognizes but doesn't understand. Sweeps of light cut through the trees, frantic. If they find her, they will drag her back to some terrible labyrinth. She trips, tumbling through the dirt, branches, thorns. She crashes into a stony basement and clambers to her feet. Keep moving, keep running. They're almost upon her, light throwing shadows, contorted, flickering. She picks up speed, breaks into a clearing, and lurches to stop at the edge of a cliff. Hundreds of feet below, shallow water, jagged rocks. She looks back. The pursuers are near, fighting through the thicket. There is nowhere else to go. She jumps. The ground rushes up, eager to meet her. In a quick and terrible snap, everything turns to black. A pitch-black void. Once they're in, they never leave. The phrase repeats in her head, flittering with the sing-song rhythm of a deranged limerick. Once they're in, they never leave. A pale blue light forms in the distance. Once they're in, they never... The mention of a pale blue light is interesting because that's the same description given to the light in the woods that Eve saw a couple chapters back, the light she didn't recognize. Back in the house, Eve jolts awake from a nightmare. We aren't told whether the previous chapter was that nightmare or if it has no relation to Eve. Eve gets up to get some water and sees that the door to the basement stairs is open. She peers down and sees Jenny near the bottom of the stairs, and she calls out to her. Jenny doesn't respond. She just stares up at Eve, unblinking in this dark staircase. Suddenly, Jenny gets up, and Eve can see that this isn't Jenny at all. It's someone tall and slender, over 6 feet tall. Eve is rightfully terrified and slams the door to the basement and tells Charlie that there's someone down there. Charlie seems dismissive of this and tells her to go back to sleep. Eve is terrified, but she does have a history of seeing things that aren't there when she's on edge, and she heads back to bed and quickly falls asleep. The next insert tells us of a Rhode Island hospital that had to evacuate due to a fire in the basement. The fire was started by a shattered gas lantern and no one died. We get another tiny insert that is a follow-up on this story from a radio station. They say that they are unable to identify how the gas lantern got there, but that no foul play is suspected. Back in the house, Eve wakes up to see that Charlie is gone and the Fausts are making breakfast in the kitchen, and she bluntly asks who said they could use their kitchen. Thomas says that Charlie told them they could before she left for an urgent meeting. Eve wasn't aware of any meeting and decides to call Charlie, but she can't find her phone. She asks to borrow one of the family's phones, but Thomas says that they don't have any on them. They say they're doing some sort of electronics fasting cleanse for their church for the next month. Thomas says that Charlie told him to tell Eve that the basement was all clear. Eve is sketched out by this whole situation and decides to walk to the neighbor's house to borrow their phone. She stops by the door and sees Charlie's locket hanging on a nail, and it's the same nail that Eve swears she removed just a few hours ago. The Fausts say that they're leaving right after breakfast and can show themselves out when they're done. Eve doesn't really care at this point, she just wants to talk to Charlie. The next insert is an online forum where someone is asking about a toy they remember from when they were younger, and it's the same toy monkey that Eve used to have. The user describes the toy and gives the name of the company, but the other members of the forum insist that both the toy and the company do not exist. The monkey that is described is a perfect match to Eve's with the clear plastic symbols and the straw hat and everything, but by all accounts, it doesn't exist and has never existed. One of the users mentions the Mandela effect, which is when something is widely remembered incorrectly, like the Berenstain Bears actually being the Berenstain Bears. There are a ton of examples of the Mandela effect, and I think the whole theory is very easily explained by people just having bad memories or their mind making logical assumptions. One of the examples of this is the fact that the fruit in Fruit Loops is spelled F-R-O-O-T when most people remember it spelled correctly. But that's just because your mind knows how to spell fruit, so of course it fills in the blank with with the information it's relied on for years. Anyways, rant over, back to the story. Eve exits the house with Shiloh, and the two of them walk down the snowy road. She sees the Foust moving truck and thinks about when the realtor showed them the house. He was kind of an odd dude and says that there was a lot of strays on the hill that the house is on. He says that some people call this mountain Stray Dog Summit, but that he personally doesn't. He says that all of the strays are down by the creek, so he's not sure why they'd call it Stray Dog Summit. Eve comes back to reality and hears a gunshot from a hunting rifle. She's not bothered by this sound given that she's out in the woods in kind of a more rural area. She arrives at the neighbor's house and sees that it's marked 3707 when it should be 3708 since it's the neighboring house to hers. Eve knocks on the door and rings the doorbell a few times, and an old woman appears behind her and introduces herself as Heather, and Shiloh is immediately very comfortable around her. This is notable given the fact that Shiloh has just barely warmed up to Charlie and is known to be very wary of strangers. Heather says that she used to foster a lot of dogs, so that's why they love her so much. Eve mentions Stray Dog Summit, and Heather looks confused, and she says that she's never heard anyone refer to the mountain like that before, which strikes Eve as odd. Heather says that she has never noticed any stray dogs in the area before, and Eve asks if she can use her phone, and Heather says, of course, and invites her inside. The next insert tells us about a couple that died of hypothermia in their house in Canada. They had a tank full of gas in the car, but they didn't use it to find warmth for some reason. It mentions that the husband was found lying under the bed in the master bedroom, and that the wife was found in the basement trying to dig into the dirt floor with her nails. This is reflective of terminal burrowing behavior, which is something that happens when someone is suffering from hypothermia. They have the urge to get into a tight, confined space. The theory is that this is an instinct that most mammals have and that humans haven't been able to get rid of, but that's it for this particular insert. Back in Heather's house, Eve is directed to the bedroom where the phone is and has the phrase, "Once they're in, they never leave," in her head. Eve asks Heather if she lives alone. She says that she saw a light turn off when she knocked on the door, and Heather looks uncomfortable and says that it must have just been a motion-activated light turning off. Eve calls Charlie, who doesn't say much, and she seems really confused that Eve is calling her, and there's also a lot of noise in the background, making it difficult for Eve to hear what she's saying. She asks when she's coming home, and Charlie seems very confused by this. Charlie asks her if everything is okay, and then the line cuts abruptly. Eve is frustrated, and she notices a photo of Heather and what she assumes to be her husband. Eve overhears her phone call and asks if Eve mentioned the name Thomas. Heather says that she used to babysit him when he was a kid, and she's very happy to know that he has a wife and a family, and she's glad that he ended up okay considering everything he went through. She's shocked that he didn't come to visit her and asks about his family. Eve mentions that Jenny hid in the basement, and Heather says that Thomas used to do the same thing. Eve wants to know more about Thomas's past, and Heather offers her some tea, so she accepts. The next insert is an advertisement for a movie theater showing the classic animated movie Spirited Away. Back in Heather's house, Eve asks about the man in the photos with her, and she says that it's her husband, Michael, and she asks what she knows about the house. Heather says that it's older than she is, and that it might be the oldest structure on the mountain. Eve asks if she knows when it was built, and Heather says that she's not sure. Eve mentions that she and Charlie tried to get some of the records from Town Hall, but they said there was a fire years ago that destroyed most of the records. Heather says that the fire is a myth and that the records were actually stolen by some crazy person back in the 50s. She's very insistent that the fire never happened and tells Eve to move on, almost a little rudely. She gets up to get the tea and starts muttering to herself. Eve hears the words Little Tommy, Alina, and Stray Mutts. She then hears what sound like footsteps near the back of the house. Eve asks Heather about the Fausts, and she says that Thomas was an only child and seems confused when Eve mentions his sister Allison. Heather says that she thought her name was Alina and that she was taken in by the Fausts after she wandered onto the property in the freezing cold. The police couldn't find any records of her ever existing, and Heather says that she grew convinced that everything in the house was changing around her. And she was convinced that there was only one way to stop this. So she stabbed Thomas 37 times in less than a minute with a fountain pen, which explains the small scars that he has on his face. Eve looks around and sees what looks like the same chimp toy she has when she was little, but the fur is a different color, and Heather says that it's her grandson's favorite toy. Eve starts to feel uncomfortable and says that she needs to leave. She starts to walk towards the door, and she hears the phone ring in the back, and Heather says it could be Charlie. Eve looks behind her and sees that a white door at the end of the hall has been cracked open, but Eve was positive that it was shut earlier. She asks Heather about this, who says that it just has a bad latch. Eve decides not to answer the phone and heads out the door with Shiloh, sufficiently creeped out. Our next insert is a police report. An officer found a man in the woods on a freezing night who seemed disoriented and scared. He was terrified of being institutionalized. As the officer approached the man, he looked over to see three similar-looking men in white suits staring at them in the distance. The scared man fled, and the police officer didn't pursue him. Notably, this happened near the Kettle Creek Bridge, which is close to Eve and Charlie's new house. Eve heads back to the house. It's now misty and hard to see, but she can spot what looks like a female figure standing next to the tree line, and she's wearing green boots like Jenny was. Eve starts to call out to her, and the figure starts to walk away. Eve pursues her, following her footprints, but sees that the footprints stop abruptly. It's like she just vanished into thin air. She's now in a clearing with an old, run-down cabin, and Shiloh takes off and runs through the door, leaving Eve with no choice but to follow. Carved into the stoop of this cabin are the words, "Old House." Eve finds Shiloh in the back room, and there are notes and maps and documents everywhere. She assumes that these are the records that were stolen from the town hall, and they all say cryptic things like, if you follow the directions properly up to this point, Red Lake will be bone dry. At its deepest point, there will be a steel hatch in the ground that leads to a house of refuge. A middle-aged woman will be there to provide further instruction. If her son has passed away in the last year, leave immediately and backtrack your route to the last house of refuge. Ensure the woman does not follow. Eve is creeped out, so she gets Shiloh and turns around to see a tall, old man with a long scar running down the side of his face standing in the doorway. He tells her that she isn't supposed to be here, and he sounds almost scared. Eve excuses herself and says that she didn't mean to intrude, and the old man says, "Those people in your house, that's not what they look like." She asks what he means, and he says that she needs to get them to leave. That she needs to do whatever is necessary to get them out of the house. Eve heads back. She notices a pale blue light coming from one of the windows of the cabin. It was the light that she noticed in the woods the night before. She walks towards her house, and it's a lot closer to the cabin than she remembered it being. The next insert is one of the more confusing one. It's a report of non-native plants and animals showing up around Eve and Charlie's house, species that have no reason to be there. One of these are the Gelschmeimer ants, which are said to be found in the South Atlantic, although a footnote tells us that no such ants exist. There are also a few codes that haven't been decoded and references to several people, places, and things that do not exist. It's a very strange report. This report also has a series of randomly capitalized letters that form the phrase, "the old gods see all," and later on in the report, they start to talk more about the old house. We're given a lot of terminology regarding the house that I will read here in a second. It seems there's an online community dedicated to learning more about the old house, and here are the terms. Host. Person who's been trapped or willfully residing in old house for longer than 1 year. If trapped longer than a month, it is essentially impossible to escape. Guest. Person who has been trapped or willfully residing for less than 1 year. Guide. A person with intimate knowledge of one or more old house wings and can safely bring tourists inside without getting lost/trapped. Tourist. Person who enters old house under the ward of a guide, generally for exploratory or personal reasons, and spends less than a week inside. Many tourists unwittingly become guests and or hosts. Trespasser. Someone who enters old house without a guide, usually by accident or with nefarious intent, for monetary gain or otherwise. Anchor, also known as trickster, spirit, demon, entity, presence, specter, etc. Either a non-human entity or a host who has been trapped for so long that they are essentially no longer human. Some are neutral, some are helpful, most are incredibly dangerous. Anchor motives are often incomprehensible. Seems like some feed on terror/confusion/chaos. Hatch. Any structure or entrance, man-made or otherwise, that can be used to enter or exit old house. Shortcut. Exactly that. Used to jump locations, extremely high risk. Hook. Room or section of old house that is impossible to escape without ritual replacement. Ritual replacement has been crossed out. These terms are very important as we will see all of these things going forward, and we may have seen some of these already. Let me demystify this story for a second. With this entire novel, finding concrete answers for what exactly is going on is tricky. No one has truly solved it, but understanding these terms will help us make sense of a few things. Even Charlie's new house appears to be old house, or at very least, part of a massive structure that is linked to other structures in impossible ways that makes up the old house. And it's left for us to decide or deduce what categories our characters fall into. For instance, would Eve and Charlie be guests since they have willfully resided at the house for less than a year? Or could they be considered trespassers because they entered the house without a guide for monetary gain since their objective is to flip the house and sell it? Or is Charlie a guide? Does she know about the old house? What is Thomas? Is he simply a guide, or is he like one of the more dangerous anchors? We'll talk about it all more later. For now, you just need to understand that we are reading a fantasy story at this point. This house has supernatural qualities that can explain a lot of the weirdness that we've seen so far. Back to the house, Eve notices that her keys are missing, but Thomas opens the door for her and apologizes. He says they can't leave without the tire chains. Eve says that there are some in the attic and that she can get them for him. She's very clearly upset at this point and isn't trying to hide it from the Fausts anymore. She goes upstairs and sees that the wallpaper has been seamlessly repaired where the dumbwaiter was before. She wonders if Thomas fixed it. She pulls down the ladder to the attic and heads up there. She hasn't been in the attic before and it's full of old junk from previous owners of the house. She finds a kennel with the name of Thomas's Chocolate Lab on it, which is weird because the family said they gave away all their stuff when they put up that listing for the dog they were giving away. Eve's flashlight dies for a second, but then comes back on, and she hears the dripping sound of a leaky pipe. She heads further into the attic and feels the cold water drip on her from above. It's kind of a consistent noise that she's hearing throughout this entire scene. She spots the tire chains and notices a box labeled Charlotte Stuff, Donate. This strikes her as odd since Charlie hasn't used that name in decades. Inside, she finds Charlie's camera and is shocked to see that she would want to donate it. She thinks that Charlie used to be really into photography and that they'd even rented a space for a photography exhibition back in Rochester. She used to love photography. She hears the front door swing open and looks out a small window in the attic to see Thomas marching out on the lawn. He screams and starts slapping himself on the face. After this episode, he collects himself, sneaks a puff of a hidden cigarette, and heads back inside the house. And Eve sees messages carved into the windowsill. This particular one says, "Don't forget which house you're in," written in the same way that "old house" was written on the doorstep of the cabin. This part is slightly confusing because it really seems like Eve and Charlie's house is the old house, but the cabin is also labeled as being the old house. This makes me think that the entire connected structure of houses and lakes and cabins and everything else is what makes up the old house, hence why the cabin will be labeled that way. Back to the story, Eve grabs the tire chains and starts heading back to the ladder when she hears the sound of the dumbwaiter arriving in the attic. She peers around the corner to find it empty and sees footprints in the dust leading away from it, and they're much too big to be Jenny's footprints. And right on cue, Eve's flashlight dies. She can hear the sound of someone skittering around in the attic and taking sharp, ragged breaths, and she can also hear that dripping pipe over and over again. She starts to slowly make her way back to the ladder when she hears the dripping sound stop. Someone must be standing under the pipe at this point, and Eve dives for the ladder. As she does, the ladder and the hatch close on her, and she pounds against it and looks over at her flashlight that she left on the ground, and it's turned back on and is illuminating a mannequin. But this mannequin takes a step forward. Eve sees a tall, slender woman with overgrown toenails and jaundiced skin coming towards her, shielding her face with her hands, and she's in a ripped hospital robe. Her hair has been shaved to its roots, and her blue veins are visible through her skin. The woman takes another step forward, freezes in place, and then takes another 2 steps. The flashlight goes out again, and she starts to scream and pound on the hatch below her. She hears the footsteps approaching when suddenly the hatch opens under her. She tumbles down from the attic, down the ladder, and slams her head on the banister. The next chapter is one of the very short ones. This is what it says. "You have to hide, you have to hide, you have to." She wakes in a room no bigger than a walk-in closet. Beige walls, rickety bed, a window that overlooks a murky pond. She's been here for months now, maybe years. She doesn't know anymore. She stopped counting when the snow stopped falling in March, or maybe February. She wonders. Back in the house, Eve wakes up on the couch. She can see Jenny and Newton playing with Legos on the floor. She asks how long she was out, and Thomas says that it's been 15 minutes. She asks why he didn't call the police, and he says that they don't have phones on them due to the digital detox they're doing, and Eve says there's an intruder in the attic. Thomas and Paige excuse their kids to another room and ask for more details. Eve describes the woman in the attic and asks if it could be Alice, and Thomas says that that's impossible. She suggests that they go to the neighbor's house and call the police, but Thomas says there's no need to escalate things and that he'll check the attic himself to see if there's really an intruder. Eve is frustrated that they won't just take her word for this. Thomas checks the attic, and Paige tells Eve that she wasn't religious before she met Thomas, but that he converted her. Thomas comes down from the attic and says that he didn't see an intruder, but he did find a flashlight. He hands it to Eve, who asked him if he grabbed the tire chains, and he says that they actually won't need them. Eve hears her phone upstairs and walks to the study, telling Thomas and Paige not to follow her. She's very upset. She sees Kai fumbling with her phone, trying to silence it. She knows it's her phone because she can see her signature cracked screen and her wallpaper. She yells at Kai and tries to grab the phone, and the two start fighting over it. Shiloh comes up the stairs and, thinking that Eve is in danger, bites down hard on Kai's ankle. She lets go of the phone, and Eve eventually gets Shiloh to let go of Kai. Thomas and Paige rush into the room to see that their son is hurt, and they ask Eve if Shiloh's up to date on her shots. She says that she is and that Kai stole her phone, but when she looks at the phone in her hands, it's Kai's. Thomas tells the family that they need to leave now, and Paige is furious at Eve. The family gathers their things quickly and leaves. Eve stands in the study and thinks about what just happened. She was sure that Kai had her phone, and she saw that it was her phone. She knew for 100% fact, essentially. She looks up and sees that the stained glass window of the apple tree is gone. It's been replaced by a normal window, and it doesn't look like it's been recently installed. She's confused by this, but she needs to go find Shiloh. Kai had kicked her several times when she was biting him, and she's worried that she'll be seriously injured. Eve finds Shiloh at the top of the stairs to the basement, and she's looking down inquisitively. Eve hears the sounds of the dumbwaiter arriving in the basement and leaves immediately. She slams the door behind her and checks to see if Shiloh's okay, and thankfully, there isn't even a bruise on her. Eve decides to get away from the house as soon as possible. Our next insert is a report of the disappearance of 5 hikers that went missing in a Canadian state park during November. Only one of them was found alive 2 months later. The surviving hiker says that they came upon a 1950s style hotel and sheltered there for weeks until they were all picked off by an unseen force and dragged through doorways to a different place. This just further solidifies the idea that this network of portals and houses can be accessed through many different means, and it appears that that's what they stumbled onto there. It's a very similar concept to the back rooms, even to the point where there seem to be people who kind of understand the mechanics of Old House and how to navigate it properly. Back at the house, Eve starts down the road and sees Charlie's pickup truck pulled up next to Thomas's moving van. The two of them are talking about what just happened. Thomas and his family drive away, and Charlie approaches Eve, asking her for her side of the story and what actually happened. Eve tells Charlie everything about the woman in the attic and the missing window. She says that she just wants to get out of the house and stay in a nearby hotel, and that she never wants to go back to the house again. Charlie is confused and maybe even a little dismissive of her concerns. She says that she's willing to go to the motel, but that she needs to grab a few things from inside the house. Eve begs her not to, but Charlie parks the truck in the driveway and heads inside. She's in there for a while, and Eve starts to get worried, and eventually Charlie emerges from the front door and gets in the truck. She says that she confirmed the window has been replaced. This seems to freak her out, but she says that maybe Thomas just took it as a souvenir, and the two of them drive away from the house, and Eve hopes that she never has to go back. The next insert is really interesting. It's a retelling of a piece of interrogation footage that seemingly disappeared from the internet one day without a trace. The person writing this report says that they are interested in the old house and are part of an online community investigating it. He has personally seen the interrogation footage before and is recounting what he remembers from it. The interrogation is between Detective Kieran and Andrew Melvin. Andrew is a 15-year-old kid who is being investigated for what happened to his friend, Peter. Andrew says that his friends dared him and Peter to break into an old house, and they broke in through the kitchen, and Peter wanted to explore the basement. They went down to the dark basement and found a pristine door at the end of the hallway that led to a hospital hallway that was also in pristine condition, and Peter walked through the door. Andrew says he couldn't see what Peter saw, but there was someone standing in the hallway that spoke to Peter. When Peter heard the voice, he went stiff with his arms to his side. This is the exact pose that Thomas did earlier in the novel when he was exploring the basement, and Andrew says that the voice was soft and it only said, "My name isn't." Andrew ran towards Peter to get him to leave, but Peter was completely stiff. He grabbed the flashlight from his hand and ran upstairs and out of the house. When he got outside, his friends weren't there anymore. Detective Kieran says that Peter is in a catatonic state and that they searched the house and didn't find the hospital hallway. Even stranger, the friends that Andrew named don't seem to exist. There are no records of them at all. Andrew even tells them about the high school that they went to, but there is nothing documenting their existence on the face of the planet. Kieran starts to get impatient with Andrew, and for a moment, Andrew seems to lose any sense of the fear he just had. He just stares directly at the camera and then his fear returns. He says that he doesn't feel like himself and that he doesn't want to be put away for being crazy. He says that he's starting to remember things that never happened, and that's where the footage cuts to black. The person writing the report says that there was no documentation that Andrew Melvin or Detective Kieran ever existed at all, which makes the footage seem like a hoax. This is all a little confusing, but it starts to make sense when you think about the fact that the old house seems to be transporting people to different realities or universes. It's safe to say that Andrew, Peter, and their other friends all really existed. Andrew and Peter enter the house, find the door in the basement that leads to the hospital hallway, and enter a new reality. Notice that this hospital hallway is most likely the basement of the hospital where the fire was set in Rhode Island. It says that there was a fire started by a gas lantern. That lantern has already shown up in Eve's house and will show up again. And that's why it was out of place, and they couldn't find any reason for why it would be down there. It came from the old house. We still aren't sure as to why Peter froze like Thomas did, but this resulted in Andrew and Peter ending up in a new reality where they were picked up by the cops. This explains why the other friends were gone when they exited the house, and why the police had no record of them ever existing. They literally aren't from that reality. And this also explains why Andrew and the detective have no record of ever existing in our reality, because the detective doesn't exist here and Andrew is now in that other reality, so his existence has been erased. Because it seems like when you travel to another reality, all trace of you is just deleted from your original reality. This could also explain why the interrogation footage has also completely disappeared. What is going to be a lot of fun is trying to figure out if Eve is still in her original reality, or if maybe she's already traveled to another one already. We'll get into all of that a little bit later. But back to Eve and Charlie, they go get a room at the nearby motel and talk for a little bit about the woman in the attic and if they think Thomas and Paige will sue them for Shiloh attacking Kai. They lay down together and Eve starts to get the feeling that the Charlie that she is talking to isn't her Charlie. She asks her how they met and Charlie tells her the story. They met at a movie theater showing Spirited Away. That's the tie-in from the earlier insert. Eve is satisfied with Charlie's response and the two fall asleep while watching a movie. Eve wakes up to the sound of Charlie's phone buzzing, and she sees that the call is coming from Eve's missing phone. She takes it into the bathroom and answers it. A panicked Charlie, speaking quietly, is on the other side. She tells Eve that the Charlie and Shiloh in the motel aren't the real ones, and that she never made it out of the house. Charlie goes quiet, and Eve can hear the sound of footsteps coming from the phone, and what sounds like muffled whispers or laughing. The call ends abruptly. The Charlie in the motel room knocks on the door and asks Eve if everything is all right. Eve says that she just needs to step outside for some air, and she takes the car keys and drives away. As soon as she leaves the motel parking lot, the fuel light comes on in the car. Eve wants to go back to the house to find her original Charlie, but she has to stop at the gas station first. The next insert is from a study on pareidolia, which is a phenomenon where the mind sees familiar shapes in unorganized patterns, like an inkblot test. Back to Eve, she goes to the gas station and kind of looks like a crazy person since she didn't bother to grab her shoes before she left the motel. She gets gas and leaves. She's pulled over by a cop who seems confused at her disheveled appearance, but lets her go. She gets back to the house, and despite everything telling her not to, she goes back inside. The next insert is about the professor that wrote the study from the previous insert. We learn that this doctor has been let go from the university he worked at. The university says that he started reinforcing the delusions of patients with Capgras syndrome, which is where someone thinks that they or someone they know have been replaced by an imposter. The professor started to believe that his patients were actually telling the truth when they said that they came from another reality or knew that their family had been replaced. This is interesting because we know that these people most likely were telling the truth. It seems this professor started looking into the old house and was convinced of its authenticity. Back at the house, Eve walks in and it seems like the power has gone out. It's completely dark inside. She calls out for Charlie but gets no response. She feels a phone vibrate in her pocket and sees that she still has the fake Charlie's phone. She answers the call and the fake Charlie asks her to tell her where she is, and she sounds worried. Eve hangs up and walks to the dining room where she sees a shadowy figure sitting at the table, slumped over. Then the figure jolts upright and stays frozen for 3 seconds before sprinting away into the darkness. Eve stands in the doorway, stunned, until she hears Charlie's voice quietly calling to her from upstairs. She rushes up there and sees the door to Allison's old room is open. She walks inside and sees the woman in the hospital gown in the corner of the room. She takes a few jerky steps towards Eve and is holding a hammer in her hand. She stops in the middle of the room and says in a quiet, childlike voice, "You have to hide. You have to hide. You have to." Eve panics and rushes to the nearest window, but it has bars over it. All of the windows in the house have been barred for some reason. Eve starts to hear the woman counting down. She realizes that this woman is wanting to play some sort of hide and seek with her. Eve rushes downstairs and, running out of time, heads into the basement to hide. She fumbles her way through the dark basement until she finds a small passage, the same one that Jenny hid in earlier. She crawls through to find the tiny nook. On the other side of the nook is an olive green door with that same strange circular symbol carved over it. Eve goes through the door and finds a cluttered room with dozens of paintings. The paintings are of a family. The father looks almost identical to Thomas, and there was a mother and a sad-looking daughter that looks a little bit like Jenny. Eve thinks that Thomas's mother must have painted them since he mentioned that she was a painter earlier in the story. All of the pictures have a young boy in them as well. The boy has Thomas's eyes and brown hair, but he has been painted onto the canvas with acrylic paint, and he looks significantly rougher than the rest of the painting. Someone went through and painted this little boy onto all of the many canvases. Eve notices a red gas lantern on the ground next to her and a bunch of glossy photographs. All of these photos show a family. The two parents, the dad with a beard and neck tattoos, and the mother with short red hair, and the daughter with bright green eyes. They all look so happy, and Thomas isn't in any of them. She sees more photos, one of the dad playing the guitar with a Ring of Eyes sticker on it, and another with a chocolate lab. Things aren't adding up here. Allison is in these pictures, but Thomas is not. Thomas said that his dad was very religious, almost Puritan, but the dad in these pictures certainly doesn't fit that description at all. Eve finds a note at the bottom of the box of photos, one that Allison presumably wrote to herself, and this is what it says. "You are not who they say you are. Thomas Foust is not your brother. He has been living, trapped, here since long before the house was built, before the trees were planted. He changed your memories, warped your family, forced himself into your life. Despite what everyone around you says, your name is not Alina, it is Allison, Allison Foust. Your father is Elijah, and your mother is Vera. The religious zealots who replaced them are not real. They are mimics. They may look like your parents, but they are not. Never forget that. Thomas, or whatever force controls him, wants to drive you mad, wants you to stay locked up here forever. He's making you see things, making you doubt your own sanity. What are his motives? He's pulling you through a labyrinth that you might never escape. It's like quicksand. The more you fight the charade, the worse it gets. There's only one way to stop it. You have to play along, wait for the right moment, then make Thomas angry or afraid. Do something extreme, something that will make his mask slip. Make him show his true face. Then you strike." So that was one of the more important lore drops in the entire book. It confirms that Thomas was not the original Faust child, and he came along later and painted himself into this canvas. Allison's parents were not super religious, they were laid back, and to me it seems like Thomas brought Allison into another reality, one where he was the original Faust child. She says that her name isn't Alina, but that's what everybody calls her, and that's what Heather referred to her as. It seems that in this reality, she might have gone by the name Alina, but that's not what Thomas called her. Near the beginning of the story, he specifically referred to her as Allison, and this gives me reason to believe that Thomas is almost a malicious entity that seems to have a vested interest in creating a family. That seems to be his ultimate goal, almost. He infiltrates the Faust family and convinces them that he was their original son, and that Alina was a stray they found in the woods. Allison doesn't go crazy at all. She was totally right about the whole situation. Thomas's current family, Paige and the 3 kids, were also most likely taken from different realities. There is a few pieces of evidence that support this. One of them being that Jenny seems to bear a striking resemblance to Allison. She could very well be a young Allison from another reality. The biggest piece of evidence for Jenny not being from our current reality is that she sneaks away at the beginning to enter the small passageway in the basement. It's a little bit of a spoiler, but we're about to get to it, but this passageway leads to another reality. Eve is about to step out into a different version of the house, and Jenny was trying to escape back to her real home by finding the same passageway. The 2 boys, Newton and Kai, are most likely some of the friends that Andrew Melvin was with when he broke into the house. They might not be actual siblings. In the insert with the interrogation, we get 2 crossed out names at the very end. Skylar Goodhill and Lewis Rue. I think these 2 might really be Kai and Newton. That's the only reason I can think as to why those 2 names were included at the end of the insert. It makes sense for them to connect somewhere, and this is the most likely scenario in my opinion. The scary woman in the hospital gown is Allison, and we're about to see what her true motive is, but I also believe that the short chapters are her point of view. I think she has existed in the old house labyrinth for a while and knows some of the tips and tricks to traversing it. In the attic, she was making strange movements and covering her eyes. The instructions that we saw in the cabin were very specific as well. Things like take a couple steps forward and stop and then turn around, all that kind of stuff. I think that those strange ritualistic movements are Allison using some of the tricks to navigate the old house. But we still have a little bit of story left. We have to find out what happened to Eve and Charlie, so let's get back to the actual story here. Eve is sitting in the dark room. She tucks the strange letter into her pocket along with Charlie's locket, and she thinks about Allison saying that she needs to kill Thomas. Thomas was supposedly stabbed 37 times in the face by Allison. It seems that was her finally enacting her plan to escape this alternate reality and take care of Thomas once and for all. Eve picks up the gas lantern and heads out of the room into the dark hallway. She sees a trail of ants walking into the darkness and hears a strange clacking sound. She follows the trail until she reaches her toy symbol monkey from her childhood, and it's an exact match, even down to the scratches and frays on him. It's her toy monkey, it's Mo. She moves past him and finds Charlie standing in the hallway, eyes closed, pale, with tattered clothing. Eve calls out to her, and the ants start to swarm all over Charlie's body. At this point, Eve notices that the hallway they're standing in no longer resembles the basement of the house. It's the hospital hallway that Andrew saw earlier in the story. The ants crawl into every single orifice and area of Charlie's body until the last one disappears in the space between her front teeth. It's kind of gross. She opens her eyes, sees Eve, and says, "What are you doing here?" She says, "You're not supposed to be here yet. She's almost here. You have to hide." Charlie turns around and sprints down the hallway, and Eve can hear someone coming down the hall behind her. She hears Allison softly saying, "Sorry, sorry, sorry." Eve drops the lantern, shattering it, and this is how the hospital fire got started. It was Eve's lantern that set the fire. Eve sprints down the hallway and finds the room with the wardrobe, the one that she thought Jenny was hiding in earlier. With nowhere else to go, she climbs inside. Allison enters the room and Eve watches her from inside the wardrobe. Allison turns to leave, and Eve lets out a short breath of air, which makes Allison turn around and stare straight at her. When Eve locks eyes with Allison, she gets a rush of her memories, almost like this weird cognitive transfer. She sees herself as Allison playing guitar with her dad, and she remembers the day that Thomas stepped out of the woods. She remembers everything around her starting to change, how her parents turned into religious zealots, and how the house started to look unfamiliar, how they started calling her Alina. She remembers stabbing Thomas over and over again as he slept, hoping to kill him. She remembers being brought to the mental institution, insisting that she wasn't crazy. After this rush of memories, Allison walks to the center of the room, leaves the hammer in her hand on the floor, and leaves. A few moments later, Thomas enters the room. He takes a look at the hammer, confused, and puts it back up on the pegboard on the wall. He leaves the room, and a few moments later, Eve exits the wardrobe. She sees that she's no longer in the hospital hallway. She's back in the basement corridor. She grabs the hammer for protection and heads into the corridor. The basement is no longer unfinished like it was when Eve and Charlie lived there. It's been almost completely renovated. Eve can hear people talking upstairs. She ascends the staircase and listens to the family in the kitchen. It's the Foust family. They're sitting down and having their dinner. It looks like this is their house, and Thomas says maybe she just went for a walk, and Paige asks him to check the basement. Eve tries to get out of the way, but Thomas finds her, grabs her arm, and asks what she's doing with the hammer. He says that he doesn't want to have to call the ward again, and he also calls her Emma. This is pretty significant because that's what Jenny accidentally calls Eve at the beginning of the story. It seems this Foust family might be the same ones we've been seeing all along. Thomas brings Eve to the dinner table. The rest of the family recognizes her as Emma, Thomas's sister. They say she's been staying with them since she was released from a mental institution. Eve thinks about Allison's note on how to take care of Thomas. She thinks that she just needs to wait for the perfect moment to strike, to finally kill Thomas and get her old life back. Our next insert is an obituary for Elijah Foust, which pretty much just confirms that Allison's original dad was the cool rocker dude that she thought he was. Back in the house, Eve goes to the dinner table. Shiloh comes in and walks directly to Thomas, and she seems very wary of Eve because it's not her Shiloh. Jenny asks Emma where her wrist tattoo went, and Thomas says that Emma never had one and that Jenny must be misremembering something again. We learn that Emma is supposed to be looking for an apartment to move into, and Paige asks her if she can maybe move in with her ex, Charlotte, and Thomas says that they're not really talking to each other. Eve sees Charlie's locket around Paige's neck and asks where she got it. She's furious at this point, and Paige says that she got it at a flea market, and Eve's rage boils over. She walks over to the Paige, grabs the corkscrew, grabs her, and puts her arm around her neck, holding the corkscrew up to her throat, and the kids start to scream. Thomas comes back into the room and tries to defuse the situation. He orders the kids to go up to their rooms, and he starts to try to calm Eve down, and she yells at him to tell her the truth. She says that her name is Eve and asks where Charlie is. Thomas says that they broke up years ago, and he starts to dial a number on his phone, and Eve tells him to stop. Shiloh is barking angrily at her, and all of a sudden, she feels a sharp pain in her leg. Paige has stabbed her with a steak knife, and without meaning to, Eve plunges the corkscrew into Paige's neck. Thomas rushes over to Paige, who is clearly dying at this point. Eve grabs a nearby hammer, and Thomas calls the police. He gives them the address of 3710 Heritage Road. Eve runs to try to find a window to escape out of, but they're all barred. She then hears Thomas scream. Paige is dead. He comes running after Eve and pins her to the window with his arm. He says that they trusted her, that they let her stay with them when she needed help. She pulls the hammer back and smashes the claw end of it into his cheek. She staggers back and pulls the hammer away, pretty much tearing his cheek away with it. He's bleeding and laying on the floor, and she raises the hammer to finish the job, but she can't do it. She runs up to the attic, hoping to find that the window up there won't be barred. Thomas calls after her, and he calls her Eve and then uses her full name of Evelyn Patricia Palmer. She finds the window in the attic and sees that it isn't barred. She starts to climb out of it, but Thomas grabs her, his bloody face smiling at her, and he says, "We gave you life." As she struggles to get free, Thomas yells a few other notable things. He says, "We were here when the light of day was born," and "We built the foundations of..." As he's saying that last phrase, Eve grabs the nearby tire chains and slams them into Thomas's broken face. This seems to daze him and almost make him calm down, and he starts speaking softly to himself. He says, "We, the house, I didn't, the labyrinth, I didn't mean to, my name isn't." Eve wraps the chains around his neck and asks where Charlie is, pulling them tighter. As she is about to finally kill him, she hears a voice behind her yell, "Let him go." It's a cop. He arrests her, handcuffs her, and brings her out of the house. Outside, she sees Heather and her husband, Michael. She also sees Allison standing near the woods. She no longer looks pale and withered. She looks youthful and somewhat remorseful. Eve tries to point this out to the cops, but Allison retreats into the woods. Eve is led into the cop car, saying that she didn't mean to, and that Thomas isn't Thomas. The next insert is part of a script for a true crime TV show, and the episode is about Emma killing Paige Foust and almost killing Thomas. We see interrogation footage between Eve and Detective Kieran, the same detective that interviewed Andrew Melvin. The interview goes about as well as you would expect. Eve claims that she isn't Emma, that her name is Eve, and she mentions her parents, and Kieran says that they exist, but they don't have any children. Charlie and Emma broke up years ago, and it's not the Charlie that Eve remembers. The police think that Emma snapped and killed Paige because they were kicking her out of the house. We also learn that the cabin in the woods has been burned down for years in this reality, and Eve is very clearly somewhere that she doesn't belong with no hope of getting back. The last chapter follows Eve in her mental institution. She calls Charlie, but she doesn't remember Eve, and she thinks that Emma is just her crazy ex-girlfriend. Eve starts to think that maybe she is Emma after all, that she's just been crazy this whole time, but she knows that she's really Eve Palmer and she can't let that go. Eventually, Thomas comes to see her and his face is mostly healed, although he has a long scar, and it's the same scar that the man in the cabin had. And Thomas says that he forgives her. She doesn't want to look at him, but he says that he brought something for her, something that he knows meant a lot to her and Charlie. Eve perks up when he calls her that. In this reality, Charlie is strictly Charlotte, so that's kind of an indication as to who he might actually be. He leaves her with a manila envelope and leaves. Eve opens it and finds the locket. Charlie's original locket. She opens it up to find the blurry picture of herself, the only known photo of Eve Palmer. The last insert is the last thing we get in the novel, and it's a post on an internet forum from a distressed woman. She says that her partner has gone missing. She has searched for her, but everyone has told her that she never existed. And she says that she's been nearly institutionalized because of this, and the book ends with her cry for help. So what can we deduce from everything that we've been given? Eve has ended up in a different reality where she has taken on the life that Allison once had. It seems that Thomas needs to have a sister, so he originally took Allison, and she somehow escaped and has been wandering through the old house looking for a way out. Eventually, she figures out that she can escape by offering a ritual sacrifice, as we talked about in the insert with the old house terminology. I believe that when Allison sees Eve in the wardrobe and Eve gets all of Allison's memories, this is her forcing Eve into her life. She has swapped places with her. This is why we see a restored Allison near the end of the novel. She's freed herself. Eve says that she looks looks remorseful, which would make sense since she has essentially doomed Eve to this terrible fate. Thomas giving Eve Charlie's real locket with her picture shows that he knows who she really is, and he seems to be almost kind of in charge of this entire charade. At the end of the novel, it seems that Eve has been erased from existence in the original reality with the original Charlie in it. She's searching for her, but no records of her exist at all. It seems like when you travel to another reality, all traces of you disappear from the first one, except for some of your closest personal connections. This could also be because we saw Charlie traveling around an old house earlier. She could have maybe just got trapped in a separate reality, and that's why Eve doesn't exist there. I believe that Thomas is some sort of entity, maybe even one of the old gods that was mentioned earlier, and he seems to be compelled to live this very specific family life. When he's fighting with Eve, he implies that he and others have existed since before the foundations of the world were built, and that he is something older than time itself. But it also seems like this version of Thomas isn't always present in every Thomas's body, if that makes sense. After Eve hits him with the chains, he seems to snap out of it and be very confused. So part of me thinks that the Thomas in the reality that Eve ends up with at the end of the story, where he's in the house and he's taking care of her, it could be genuine that he really believes this is his sister, but he's almost inhabited, or he is possessed by these old gods. I haven't really figured that part out. And there was also the Morse code message, which when translated says, "The old man with the scar has lived in the cabin for centuries and goes by many different names." We saw Eve run into this old man in the cabin, and he seems to have a very similar scar to the one that she gives Thomas at the end of the novel when she hits him with the hammer. So if this old man in the cabin is Thomas, why does he tell Eve that the people in the house at the Foust don't really look like how they appear? My guess is that this could possibly be another version of Thomas, one that's free of any of the control that the old gods seem to have over the other Thomases at times. He could be looking in at himself and seeing that this particular version of himself is just a puppet being driven around by a malevolent force in the old house. And honestly, I've just scratched the surface on the many theories that surround this book and the original internet horror story it was based on. There's an entire subreddit dedicated to discussing this world and what the old house might truly be, and I would love to do a deeper dive on that particular sub in a later video. But for now, this video is getting much longer than I originally intended, but that's not a bad thing. It's just a testament to how much there really is going on inside this book. I really enjoyed my time with We Used to Live Here, and I would absolutely love if the author explored more of this universe in a follow-up novel. I think that could be really cool. I would love to either see a novel about Thomas's story so we could maybe understand more about his character and motivations and what might be going on inside his head. Or I think a novel following a character or characters that are already intimately familiar with the methods of traversal through the old house could be really cool as well. It could almost be like a backrooms thing, something like an SCP where you have someone traversing through the old house after having studied it for years. I just think that this author has created a super fascinating world with some really intriguing mythology, and I hope that they continue to further explore this universe. Thank you all so much for watching this video. My literature videos are typically a bit harder of a sell, but I really enjoyed this book, and I just needed to talk about it with somebody or the internet. If you like this video, then please subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet. I cover both internet horror and horror literature. I'm trying to reach 100,000 subs at the end of the year. I try to make these videos pretty frequently. I'm doing 2 a week right now, but I might go down to maybe doing a little bit less than that because it's been kind of crazy and hectic lately. If you like these long breakdowns of horror novels, then I would suggest that you watch my video on My Heart is a Chainsaw or my video on The Disappearance at Devil's Rock. That one's called, I think it's called Solving the Disappearance at Devil's Rock. Those are both videos much like this one. If you're a fan of internet horror, then I have my creepypasta analysis series along with videos on Pen Pal and Baraska and a few videos covering some of the stories in the SCP universe. If you want to support me further, then consider becoming a channel member, or for just $3 a month, you'll get access to my Discord, members only videos, early access to all my videos, and access to my members only book club. You'll also get your name in the credits of all my videos like you're seeing right now on the screen. A massive thank you to all my gold tier members: Amanda Mapes, Lucas Fernando, Chris Lamb, Ezra, Silent Trails, Blue Lady Media, Tyler the Leper, Vix Corner, Miss Joy 16, Coco Boko, Cherry Shark, Moonsong Vlog, Starlight Pink, Jackson Moore, Amanda Castillon, Lexi, Arcade Link Author, Pyrocat B, The Official Gar, YBAP Flow, Hi, Zapodapos, Semra, Laura Gonzalez, Floropause, Rafael Sampiao, Classic Pats Games Plus, Miranda M, Lemonade Slug, Heat O'Brien, Ben Best, Marin Elizabeth and XNM, Sumstar, Digital Fox 615, Issa, Yuthon, Sherbert, Amelia Nomura, Temple, Ellie, Jupiter Rainstorms, Gambit, Junie, and Leah. Thank you so much for the support so far. I just hit 50,000 subs a couple days ago, which is absolutely crazy. I'm just super pleased with how this channel has grown, and there's a lot of really great stuff yet to come. But for now, it is time for another Davis Morgan lore segment. This time I'll just talk briefly about something that I mentioned in my earlier video, my life as a percussionist. I played percussion in both middle and high school, and I played marimba in my field marching band, like our big marching show, and I was the front ensemble section leader. It was a ton of fun. I also played in the pit orchestra my junior year of high school, which is something that was so unbelievably fun. We were doing Oklahoma, and that score is really fun for auxiliary percussionists. I don't play percussion anymore because I don't have access to a xylophone and marimba. I do drum on my chest a lot, and I still play piano pretty much every day. I would love to eventually own a marimba or xylophone or vibraphone and start playing again, but those are very expensive instruments, and also my landlord would probably not love how loud those instruments can be. So yeah, there's another piece of Davis Morgan lore for you. Pretty short this time. I gotta spread these out. But thank you all so much again for watching this video, and I'll catch you in the next one. See ya.